So, getting some comments by Cade Klubnik, who Tennessee played in the Orange Bowl, Clemson quarterback. He specifically pointed out Tennessee and Tennessee's tempo as something that Clemson would try to attain. So, is this the first that we're going to see? Yes. Is it the last? I don't think so. I think you've seen a lot of teams look at Tennessee and what they've been able to do with what is slightly above average talent, not great talent. I think that's going to prove out with Jalen Hyatt, and you and I have talked about. But the way that Tennessee's been able to throw tempo at people, is it replicable? Is the question. People will try to replicate it, but is it replicable? What do you think, Caleb?
Well, it is because it's already replicated. I mean, remember, Lincoln Riley runs the exact same offense as Josh Heupel out in California. They have the same system. I mean, that was why it was so ingrained. I don't know the word, angering to Josh Heupel that Bob Stoops scapegoated him and fired him. And then he goes and brings in Lincoln Riley, who was running the same offense that Josh Heupel wanted to run, but Bob Stoops wouldn't let him run. And so,
but let me ask you this, because there's kind of a different question that I have. Aside from Lincoln Riley, aside from Josh Heupel, the guys that are currently doing it, and I guess you could include Sonny Dykes, even though that's different, but it is tempo. Can you just up and say, hey, we're going to run 85 plays a game? I think that's easier said than done.
Yes, I think Garrett Riley at Clemson can do it because he is a Sonny Dykes disciple. The problem is, what people aren't getting about Josh Heupel's offense is it's not just tempo. That's not the only thing that gives him an advantage. It's the way he spreads the fields with the trips at receiver. It's the way he actually utilizes the running game really effectively. I don't think Garrett Riley is a Sonny Dykes disciple. I don't think he's going to be running the ball that much. Do you, Dave?
No. And I think where you're going now, here's the thing about Clemson. If Brent Venables is still there as the defensive coordinator, you're going to get major pushback from the second most accomplished coach on your staff, aside from Dabo Swinney. So I don't think that a program can just up and say we're going to be tempo, because that is an entire program build that you do, which includes practice, which includes your emphasis on offensive players and recruiting, which to some extent de-emphasizes defense. So I don't know that you can just up and replicate that if that's not in your DNA. I mean, I can watch film all day long of Michael Jordan, but I'm not going to be able to jump up and dunk a 10-foot goal tomorrow.
Yeah, the only coach who I knew that was somewhat adept at doing that would take different things and try to adapt year in and year out was David Cutcliffe, but he still had a base system. Like I remember when David Cutcliffe remember when he installed the no huddle Eric Ainge's senior year?
Yes.
But it wasn't like they were running tempo with the no huddle. They were basically just calling the plays, but they just weren't huddling. You would have to see Eric Ainge looking at the sideline for every play to be called.
Yeah, they just basically didn't want you to sub.
Yeah, exactly. And so but this is, you're right. It's more of a 180. I didn't even think about it like that until you brought it up. It's like a college basketball team saying, we're going to go from the motion offense to the flex offense overnight, and we're going to fully run tempo. Now, it's possible. Look, Bear Bryant installs the wishbone out of the blue in 1970 and revitalizes his career doing it.
Well, in Tennessee in 89 went from the 3-4 to the 4-3 because they started 0-6.
Yeah, that's right. They did.
So you can make vast changes to your scheme, but this would be a program changer. If like, let's take Mark Stoops. If he up and decided the only way I'm going to win the SEC East is to run tempo and throw my defensive history to the wind, he can't up and do that tomorrow. He doesn't have the ability. You mentioned the dribble drive with John Calipari at Kentucky. Well, why can they do that? Because they have the best athletes a lot of times, and they can beat you one-on-one, and then you have to help. You can't just up and do that with 5 dudes. And I don't think that other football programs, Caleb, can just up and do that. I don't think it's replicable easily.
Well, also with this, we watched that Clemson. I don't think Clemson is the same at receiver that they were a few years ago. I don't think they have the same elite weapons. And that's the thing. That's the big part about this offense more than anything. you have to have receivers that are really, really, really fast. That is, I mean, it's weird because Heupel's going for size more than, but I think all the receivers are still pretty quick off the step they can break bump coverage because they have to be able, again, the routes aren't complex, but it is important for the receiver to get behind the cornerback. That's crucial. And they have to be fat. The only way the reason Heupel's offense is so successful is because you can't disguise when you're blitzing. But the only way that works is if the receivers are so fast that if you try to disguise it, you're going to get burned, if that makes sense. And so I don't know if Clemson can actually run that. They could still probably run tempo. Look, they ran a spread with Dabo and with Tony Elliott, so I'm sure they could do it. I don't think it's as drastic as what you said Mark Stoops doing would be. That's a lot more drastic. I think this is a little more possible.
Mr. Jones says, I think Heupel has his own twist on the offensive style. I agree with that. It's a combination of not only tempo, but wide splits that Tennessee uses, which, for those that aren't following, that you have the receivers spread across the field horizontally. Mr. Jones also saying quarterback and running back on the same page and have option routes the defensive back can't prepare for. That is true as well. But the best point I think you brought up, Mr. Jones, is Heupel, having played quarterback, helps him in understanding what truly works to beat different coverages. I agree with that. There's something just innate about Heupel's ability to look at a defense and his ability to translate looking at a defense to whoever is in the press box. It'll be Joey Halsley, I would imagine, this fall. But whoever his offensive coordinator is, playing quarterback really helps in that regard.
Yeah, also who he played for, because he went from, let's not forget this, he went from Mike Leach in 99, where he learned the air raid, and then he played for Mark Mangino in 2000, who was a totally different type of offensive coordinator and was almost like a creative Fulmer, if that makes sense with his approach. You know, he approached more from the line. That's why Heupel's teams are much more physical than your typical, I guess you call this veer and shoot offense. It's like it's Art Briles and Mike Leach. The offense is you take what Art Briles ran and you take what Mike Leach ran and you combine the two. And I think his is a lot more physical. Actually, that is the difference between him and Lincoln Riley. His offense is more physical than Lincoln Riley's offense too. I do think this will be possible. It's funny you bring up 3-4 to 4-3. I think Tennessee fans have a little bit of trauma from 2012 with the 4-3 to 3-4. I think that whole shift is overrated. I don't think that was about to switch from 4-3 to 3-4. I think Sal Sincere was just a bad defensive coordinator, honestly.
Yeah, it's horrible. As I was told by one coach that coached with him at Alabama, said he's not very bright and he's not good with people. Other than that, he'll do great. That's pretty clear cut. If you're not smart, I mean, the guy was being sarcastic. If you're not smart and you're not good with people, how good are you going to be at any endeavor? And he was a terrible defensive coordinator.
Yeah, terrible. I think Tennessee could have had he said at one point, I'll never forget, he did the reverse of Monty Kiffin. Monty Kiffin, to his credit, when he was at Tennessee, when he was installing his cover 2, he said, it's more important to play fast than to learn the offense, than to learn the defense. And Sal Sincere had the exact opposite approach.